Okay.
Hello. Oh, here we are. Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Spiritual Fertility. This is Alison Bucklin, and I have another lovely guest with me today. She is a guest who we also met on LinkedIn, same time frame. A lot of the people who have been influences in my own life, who I've grown relationships with and have aligned with over the last several years, have come from that beautiful platform. But she is actually the person who is the furthest away from me as we sit together and converse and record this next episode for you all. Before I introduce her and share her stories with you of her spiritual fertility, I would like to take the opportunity to share the intention that has come forth through the conversations that we had prior to hitting record. And I also would like to take the opportunity to block out all interference across any time, space, planes, lives, dimensions, and all levels of consciousness. That is something that I usually do prior to hitting record, not something that I did prior to hitting record today. So, bringing through this conversation to you all that is love and all that is light and all that is of the highest good so that you hear what is coming through. Our intention for this conversation is to have the power of personal responsibility. And that will come through in my guest story and the decisions that she had to make moving forward. So, Jill Brown, please introduce yourself to the rest of our listeners here, and then we will get into all that you shared and that you have to share with everyone who's listening.
Thank you, Alison. It's so wonderful to be here your guest. And hello to everybody who watches. Um, yes, we met on LinkedIn, and we were both Blue Angels, and we've got to know each other over the years, which has been wonderful. And I'm so glad that we met. And I don't think anybody ever comes into our life that we're not meant to meet. And it's just wonderful that we can be here today, me all the way over in Wales and you in the USA. And the technology allows us to interact together. A little bit about myself. I went self-employed when I was heading towards my late 20s, when I became a driving instructor. And I had no idea what that would entail, being self-employed. There was no Google to look anything up. So I just jumped in and learned as I went. Had my own driving school for over 22 years. When I was 29, I decided I'd learn to fly. So I went for flying lessons and married my instructor. So, yes. And it's the funniest thing because I was in the car with a learner driver and we were about to do a maneuver and a light aircraft flew over and I said to her, do you know, I'd love to try that. And she said to me, well, you know, you can just go to the local airport and have a lesson, don't you? And I said, no, I didn't know. And her brother had learned to fly, so she knew everything about it. And I went down and had a lesson, and then Chris was teaching me, and that's the story of how I met my husband. And then after retiring from teaching people to drive, I then trained and certified as a coach. So that's up to the present date.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That's so cool how one thing led to another in your life
Yeah.
and an interest turned into, I guess it's really following that curiosity and knowing that your choice in the matter, like, oh wait, there's that spark there. I mean, it's our intuition, right? It's our inner guidance. And actually, we were talking beforehand about spiritual awakening and reawakening and using the experiences that we have. But I would love for you to share with your listeners what was passed down to you didn't know, and we'll get into what the catalyst for like your real wake up was. But I just thought it was really fun how you've always been this way. I was like, well, because knowing what I know of you just through the conversations that we've had and what I see on Facebook or LinkedIn or other platforms, it is that, yes, you are spiritually in tune, given the coaching that you do and your soul avatar, and that you are Reiki certified and you do practice Reiki. But I asked you that question about being spiritually awake now, and I'd love for you to share with our listeners how that came to be and how that has come through your childhood, and that many of us keep that buried inside our gifts and our powers that we have.
Yeah. Well, my father always talked to me about my inner voice, my inner knowing, my intuition, and how to always listen to that voice. He also taught me how to just go to sleep really easily as well. So getting into bed and going out to sleep is like seconds for me because of what he taught me from a child. And we'd spend a lot of time out in nature, and he'd teach me about the trees and the plants and what we could eat, and the fact that there was never any need to be in lack or hungry when we've got all the abundance that's around us. And I told you about his aunt, that my father was one of seven, so the dining table was a fair size because 9 of them sat around it. And when all the children were there, and this one aunt, they'd say, make the table dance. And she'd put her hands above it and just wiggle her fingers, and the table would move around. And there was nobody to lift it or move it in such a way. The children used to dance around it and the table would be dancing. So that kind of thing, or I don't know what to call it, was so normal to my family, So I grew up with that being normal. And
Right,
then,
that magic, the
yeah,
magic, the power of it, the use of our hands, the spiritual aspect of, I mean, because like that could be told as a make-believe myth to kids today or whatnot. And it also brings forth what your experience sharing with your dad, what he passed down to you. And so for us as spiritually awake individuals, I think it's really important to have those talks with young people, with our children, with those that are around us, to know that it's okay. It's important to listen to your inner guidance.
yes, normal. Used to say to me, if you have, when I was sort of older, when I learned to drive, and he said to me, if you have a bad feeling about going down a certain road, go a different way. Listen to that inner voice saying, don't go that way. And I always paid attention to that. And if ever I have a feeling like, no, don't go that way today, I'll go a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And you may never know the reason why, but there's going to be a reason. And it doesn't matter whether we get to know it or not. It's the fact that we pay attention to that and listen. And, he didn't tell tall tales just to make things up. He told me some strange things, like when he was in the war, and an old lady that lived nearby read tea leaves, and she said to him, drink this cup of tea. And she looked and she said to him, you're going to have a very difficult time in the war, but you won't die. And he always listened to things like that, And he did have a near-death experience as a child. He had pneumonia. And he he told me what it was like, and that he was on this mountain and it was all light, and he knew there were people around, and he didn't want to come back. And he was told it wasn't his time yet and he had to go back. And when he opened his eyes, his mother said to him, "We thought we'd lost you for a while." And one of his brothers was blown up in the war. He lived, but he had shrapnel all through his body. And it's exactly the time he was blown up. My grandmother was walking through the town and she suddenly screamed and went onto the floor. And when people ran across to ask her what was wrong, she said, "Stop them throwing the stones at me."
Mm.
And she actually felt like people were throwing small stones at her. And she was trying to protect herself, and there was nobody doing that. And it turned out it was exactly that same time. So there's so many things happened in my family that I'm buried for a long time. I paid attention to listening to the inner voice, but all the other stories, I almost packed them away, forgot about them. And I don't know why we do that, Alison.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I think there's probably multiple reasons why. I mean, because maybe it could be something we see or something someone says that says, "Oh, that never happened." We don't know, because it can get buried in our subconscious that then takes us on this path of thinking, wait, am I like crazy for thinking that that happened? Or this doesn't make any sense. Or another thing too is, in this world that we live in, we can care so much about what other people think, what
Yeah.
other people are going to think about what we say, what we do, how we look, all of those things, when really it's it's us. We're unique individuals, and it does not matter
No.
what others think or say, but that can happen in our whole life. And I love how can your story, the stories and the examples that you shared, shows how connected we really are. It really made me think of when my Aunt Dorothy passed away, and the night she passed away, that same night, and she lived with my parents not too far from us, but in my house and in my sister's house, both my right around the time we found out later that she passed away, my sister's son, my nephew, and my daughter, both of them fell out of bed.
Really?
Yes. And we like put this all together and we're like, like they both like fell out, like we were awakened
Mm.
because they both fell out of bed.
Wow.
And which was the time that my aunt was passing. So she was passing through and waking us up, I suppose, or just kind of, I don't know what the exact is, but we are all connected, and you can't make those things up, and you
Oh,
can't. You have to know that that connection is there,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
But yeah.
Isn't it interesting that we always talk about our uniqueness and how we want to be seen as unique, and yet we all try to be the same?
Hmm.
It's like an oxymoron, isn't it?
It is. And I think that much like the powers and the gifts and our inner voice gets passed down, because there's an ancestral component certainly that gets passed down,
Yeah.
and even societal programming and things that factor into our life. But um we do want to be unique, and we do, but yet at the same time we do care about what others think. I had an example, and thankfully I have the opportunity to work with children, and at their like foundational level of when things can be said that create a negative inner voice for them, or things that can be said to create a positive or life lesson. There was this example that just happened this week. This little girl came up to me and she was so upset, and she said the little kid's name, and she's like, he made up a name about my Lego block and I just don't like it and he's making up this name. And I looked at her and I said, doesn't matter what he is saying about your creation. Do you love your creation? Yes. Do you want to name it what you want to name it? Yes. Doesn't matter what he says about it. Just ignore him. Brush it off. And like to have that ability to just teach little ones. And even as, I mean, we can teach, you're in the coaching industry now and you help others, and these are the type of things that need to be reawakened and retaught and relearned and unlearned, because yes, we are unique in ourselves, but there is so much that's passed down that like we're comparing, oh, is this one going to like this? And social media adds to it as well.
Oh,
Like for sure. I mean, we talked about that ahead of time and why, reasons why we both are no longer very active on the LinkedIn platform is because you feel that you need to keep up with everything, or that you are, it's really can take over your whole life for sure, and create that anxiety. But you now help others in your role, which kind of transitions us into another important topic that I want to talk about for you to share in your story, is that point when you had to take personal responsibility and why that was, and the health diagnosis that really changed your life.
yeah, yeah, certainly. I retired from being a driving instructor, and I was told I needed knee replacements, and I was diagnosed diabetic. And it was a really dark time. And some people say, oh, it's only diabetes. But it's diabetes is a big thing, you know, it affects our entire body. So it really impacted me. And I went into a very dark place, and it was terrifying. Like I said to you, I was afraid to eat, and I was afraid to not eat, because you have to eat to keep yourself at a regulated sugar level. But everything became terrifying. And it was only when I was sat there the one day, really, really scared, not knowing what to do. And my husband said, should we have lunch? And I said, I don't know what to do. And he offered to make an omelette. And it was like, that's perfect. You know, eggs, protein, there's no sugar. It's going to do me good. And I thought, I can't live like this. I've never lived in a place of fear. This isn't me. Who am I in this place? And who do I want to be? Do I want to be this person down here in the dark? Or am I going to pop back up into the light? And it took a lot of research to get the food right. And I get quite peeved if somebody says to me, oh, you can eat that as a diabetic, if I know it affects me, because it's a very personal thing. You know,
Sure.
somebody else might eat something and it has no effect on them, and somebody else it'll affect a lot.
For sure.
I worked so hard to find out what affected me and what didn't. And then I got a personal trainer, and I got stronger. The muscles around the carry my knees, my personal trainer said, if the muscles are weak, instead of the knee moving in that direction, it can move always. So if it's strong around, it goes back to being in the right order. So I mean, I couldn't walk a mile without being in pain. And once I'd worked with him, it took about 6 months. I could walk 10 miles and not be in pain, which is
Wow.
such a big difference. You know, to go from that to that is huge. So that was a reawakening for me of what was light. And I know a lot of people talk about spiritual bypassing, but I sometimes think that can be used in a judgment to not be in the light.
Yeah.
If you live in a light place, you're not bypassing anything. You're just choosing the light. You're not denying the shadows. All the shadows exist, but you accept them and you send love and you send light to those shadows. They're there to teach us. All the shadows and the dark places are there for lessons. It's not about blanking them out to saying they don't exist, is it?
No, not at all. They are there to teach us lessons, and it comes down to the personal choice and the responsibility that we have when we are in those dark places, and to stick your head up and be in the light, or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what personal responsibility is, isn't it? It's
It
not
is.
trying to change anybody else. It's about making the changes that are right for you and taking the responsibility for those changes. And everybody else is responsible for theirs.
Exactly, which comes right back around to the topic of caring what others think, because it has no bearing on what our evolution is going to be, or the choices that we make for ourselves, because we're not just unique in everything about us, certainly, but in our gifts and our abilities and our skills and our strengths and our values, in our cells, in our experiences. And no one has the exact same feelings with the same situation that we do. So
No,
it gives us, I mean, and that's exciting though,
it is.
isn't it?
Yes,
Mhm.
it is exciting. But it also means that we can't say to people, oh, I know how you feel.
Right.
Because we only know how we feel. And the parameters around us give us those feelings. We can empathize, but we can't know what somebody's feeling.
No, no. And we can't. We can empathize, and we can say, I understand that what you're feeling is difficult, or it is
Yeah.
beautiful or exciting, but we only know what we feel. And that's a great point to make, because you hear that very often. Oh, I know how you feel. No,
Yeah.
you don't. You can empathize and understand it, but I also think it's, some people, like, you mean well. We mean well, right?
Yeah.
When
Oh,
we
it's
say
meant
this,
well. Yes.
for sure, we mean well. And those type of phrases are things that have been passed down, that we've
Yeah.
heard along the way. And so, as a result of all of this and all of the changes that you've made, and stepping into the light and continuing to remain in the light, you've been able to create such a beautiful life that now you help with others. So I'd like to move into talking about some of the tools that you've developed, or some of the things that you've trained in that allow you to help others. So I know Reiki, and we've talked about Reiki on Spiritual Fertility for sure, how amazing that is. But tell us about the soul avatar.
Oh, right. The soul avatar is something that came to me, and there's nothing written down. There's nothing to send out to people. When I talk about it, the people that want to go through it just go, oh, yes, I want that. And what's really funny about it is I argued about about it. I can't tell people about soul avatar.
Who did you argue with? Yourself?
My higher self, I
Oh,
guess.
your higher self. You're right. What we can do that. And the reason that's why I asked it, because we can argue with our higher self. No, I can't do that. Like the internal dialogue or our spirit
Yes,
guides or like the our higher team.
yes, yes.
So right.
It was a full-on argument. I can't put that up. I can't tell people about that. Why not? I've got nothing written down. You don't need anything written down. All this is terrifying because I've got nothing to evidence. It's okay. And then somebody asked me, what you doing new? And I said, oh, I've got something new. Oh, tell us about it. Oh, I'll tell you about it next week.
Huh.
And it was like, okay, we'll look forward to it next week. And then I was like, oh, next week. And the next week I just talked about it. And straight away somebody contacted me and said, I want to do that. And it's literally a space where somebody can explore anything. And we just set the intention to find the answers. And I just ask questions. And they explore from there. And for most people, it's really emotional. Somebody's set up their whole business path from doing it. She actually changed the direction of her business. Somebody got all the colors and everything they wanted for their website. So it's always different. I never know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And all kinds of things show up that gives the person like an insight to something they're trying to find a way through. So it's always when somebody has something specific they want to look at.
Yes.
If somebody turns up and they say, well, I don't know, we've got nowhere to go with that.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a technical thing, then again, it's usually, I've done that where somebody said it's something technical and it's turned out to be something else that's behind it.
Right.
Because I can't do a technical thing, I'm not a techie. But it's something that's behind there. So the soul avatar just opens up a complete space.
That's wonderful. I mean, there's so many layers to everything, and I think that it's brave to move forward in spite of that fear or that argument or self-doubt and like, what are you talking about? Because yes, it's so fearful to put yourself out there and do those things, but there's always a higher purpose that we cannot see at all. And that once we do that, then you can continue to find out more is revealed. Because now, because you moved through that fear, you listened to your higher self and that inner voice, you stepped in and put it out there and shared it, even though it was scary, you've been able to help others and move them forward. And that's the ripple effect that we created. I mean, it goes back to, you mentioned right from the start, we're both Blue Angels. What are Blue Angels? Well, Blue Angels is it's a group, and this was I guess it was, I don't know, a phenomenon, a project back in 2018 where the purpose was to create random acts of kindness to inspire others on LinkedIn to create more random acts of kindness. So this was all logged. Renee Johnson started the whole thing. Props to Renee. And our goal was to create 1,000 random acts of kindness by the end of the year. This was over a couple months. And so Jill and I were both on the Blue Angels team. And led by Jill Sullivan, who is another beautiful soul. And so we were all connected by that ripple effect of sharing kindness, which then comes around to that ripple effect that comes when we listen to our inner guidance and step through the fear and move into where we're supposed to be. I was scared as heck to start a podcast and to put that out there. And it's so fun. I love it. And it's wonderful to do, but like it's scary. Like, what is that going to be? No, I'm not doing it now. I can't do it now. And I fought with myself for 4 years to do that. But now it's out there, and so I'm very proud of that. And it's brought me to people like you that are bringing forth this beautiful energy to others who are listening and who will continue to tune into this. I also want to tell our listeners about what is conversational intelligence. You shared that's something that you went through to get certified in. So I think that's really, I'm curious about that.
Right, I'm an advanced practitioner in it. And it was created by Judith Glazier, who passed away actually just before I finished it. There were over 1,000 people doing the course, and it lasted for 9 months. But she had cancer, and she'd set it up with W. Beck's. So they actually created all the support, and with people who'd worked with her for years. So when she passed away, everybody could carry on, so everybody's certified. But it was wonderful. It was her life's work. And she talked about she'd be driving down a road and she'd hear turn left. And she wasn't going to go left, but she'd hear turn left, and she'd go down, and she found this school with autistic children in, and she went in and ended up doing some work with them. And she was very much involved with heart math. So that's how I got introduced to heart math.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that's a wonderful organization. And she actually shared that she created the dashboard, and she went in to speak to hundreds of people, and she didn't know what she was going to say, and she had the whiteboard, and she picked up the marker, and she heard draw an arc. So she drew an arc, and she said, what now? And she drew on me, and the other side we, and she created the dashboard of going from I to we, and where we are on the trust. If we're in low trust, we stay in our I, and when we go to high trust, we change to we. So she talked about what does it need to go from I to we. And, that's phenomenal when you can go into a business and take them from I to we. Because so often people are like so afraid for their jobs, aren't they? And I've got to outperform everybody else, rather than we all perform together and the business grows. So although it was really more for people that do a lot of corporate work, or there were a lot of people that do corporate work doing it, it was a really fascinating, interesting course for me that's I would never regret having done. And I was on masterminds with in groups. We had mastermind groups, and I was with people that were like terrifying to me because of their huge amount of experience. And we took turns in facilitating, and I'd never done facilitating. And it was like, oh, I've got people with 30 years experience, and I've never done this. And I gave the outline of what we were going to do on this meeting to the person who'd send it all out. And she said, do you want to give them a bit more information? And I said, no. I said, we're going to do it this way. And it turned out that terrified them. They told me after that was scary, because normally it was all so structured. And I kept it really open. So it's interesting that we can feel that somebody's more experienced and feel afraid and uncertain what we can, how can we possibly open that person's life anymore when they've got all this experience? And then you find out that they just feel the same as you. When it's something different to what they're used to, it becomes an unknown experience, and you all feel the same. So it was a hugely valuable lesson to me. And, to know that we're all the same.
Yeah. No matter who you are, we all have to step out of our comfort zone.
Yes. Yeah. And it's then so alive, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And you never know what's on the other side. Conversational intelligence, going back to that and like sharing all of this and how much you learned, and that, I mean, it really helps me, or how I think of that, or how I'm relating to it is that more of like a clairaudience, listening. And is that what it is, like having the intelligence to
Listen.
have a conversation and hear and listen to your higher self and your guides or inner voice,
and listen to each other,
and listen to each other.
and talk. One of the exercises that she did was talking in groups, is get people to talk about things that they've got in common. Because like we've got the Blue Angels in common. That's where we started, and we can talk about anything from there. If we had no Blue Angels and we'd only met today for this podcast, we would have had to have found some common ground at the beginning in order to have a conversation. So when people find that common ground, do you ride a bike? Do you like traveling? Do you like this? Do you ski? I know you ski. And suddenly you can talk, and it opens up conversation, and you're able to travel in the conversation then.
Yeah, I mean, it's asking questions, it's listening, it's going back and forth and learning that about one another. Yeah, that's so fascinating. I keep thinking about within, because I work in schools, how important that is, not only, of course, for us to continue to learn as adults, but how foundational that can be for kids. We do a lot of restorative circles in our school and in our classrooms, where we'll sit in circles and you ask questions, right? You find out, that's how you find out these touch points of continuity that you have with others, that because we all are connected. There's a reason you and I met when we did, and there's a reason why, as you talked about in your driving school, and how you had your person that you were teaching to drive who happened to know somebody who talked to you as the plane flew by, and you're like, wait, it's just these like little touch points along the way, which makes life so exciting.
Because anybody could have been in the car with me.
Sure.
Somebody who knew could have looked and said,
Right. But it's like divinely orchestrated
yeah,
that you were meant to be there with her.
yes. And was it really interesting? I even went into a different flying school to what Chris was working in. And a chief flying instructor who worked for both said to me, come over here to this one, and I think I can just get you a flight with somebody in the back for now. And I went in, and Chris was just leaving, and he said, oh, I'm just going on a flight. And I got put in the back with these couple of other guys and went on a little jolly for half an hour and back, and then I booked a lesson. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just that it happened to be her in the car. It was I ended up in a different flying club and got taken to the one where he was.
Right.
Which is again fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It is. I mean, when you are able to look back and see from that perspective, once you're through what you're through, and being able to like have that hindsight and to look back and see how divinely orchestrated really things are, even the things that we're meant to go through and the things that happen to us, right? They don't happen to us, they happen for us.
Yes.
So like being diagnosed with diabetes, had you not had to have your knee replacement, then you wouldn't have known that. Then you wouldn't have fallen into your dark place, that you wouldn't have had to take personal responsibility to have the choice to come through, to be
Yeah.
able to reverse your diabetes and then move through and be awakened, to have this reawakening to another life. And the exciting thing is that we get to do this all the time. And we do get to be co-creators in that process too, by following our intuition and our inner voice and taking personal responsibility to make that choice. That gets me excited.
It's hugely exciting.
Yeah.
It's massive, isn't it?
Yes.
And we should be excited about it every day, shouldn't we?
We should be excited about it every day. I get to be excited about what's unfolding in my life every day, and being able to I mean, it comes back to like gratitude, and we can be excited about it, but coming back to being grateful that we have the opportunity. It takes certainly a perspective to go back and look through and see that the dark places were there for us. That's a victor mentality. That's not a victim mentality, because we
No.
can be in that victim mentality, but we can also be in that fixed mindset, having a growth mindset, having a victor mentality, taking personal responsibility, listening to that inner voice. Those are all the things that are conscious decisions that we have the power to do every day. And to me, that's what makes it exciting.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely it is.
Yeah. Well, good. That's awesome. Now, before we wrap up, is there anything that you feel called to share, or a tool that you like to share with others that who are on their spiritual path and they're in their human journey right now?
All I always love to share is the heart math, heart brain connection. And it's literally 6 breaths. And you just put your hand over your heart. And you can do it even when you're walking. You don't have to put your hand over your heart, but that concentrates the mind to the heart. And you just take, when you breathe in and breathe out, the same number of breaths. So if you breathe in for 6, breathe out for 6. There's no gap. And while you're breathing, concentrate that you're breathing into your heart space. And then think of anything that brings you complete joy. So while you're thinking of something that's completely brings you joy, and you're thinking about breathing into your heart space, just about 6 breaths. And that activates your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. And Nike use that with their top athletes because it activates you and calms you. So if you're going to go onto a stage and speak to people, you can do that. If you're going into a meeting, or if you're going into a situation where you're uncertain, where you want to be calm but alert, or you can just use it. I do it every day. I do that heart activation, brain heart, because the heart has got its own brain, and the heart speaks to the brain more than the brain speaks to the heart. So we can really lead with our heart and our heart brain when we connect the two.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And like as you're explaining it, I'm like breathing and feeling joy. I mean, it really does ignite something within your inside of you. So thank you so much for sharing that and for coming on and talking to me on this podcast. And for all those that are listening, please take the opportunity to review our show, to subscribe, to share with someone that you think will benefit, and to help us reach more individuals who need these type of things to motivate us, to tools to inspire and awaken us, so that we can all come together to create those ripple effects of kindness, of love, of sharing, of giving, of awakening, of magic, and all of that.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Of course.